I somehow managed to go a whole year since Beautiful Day fabrics came out without ever sharing a Beautiful Day Quilts trunk show. I'm not sure how it happened, but today I am here to fix that, and I am going to be showing you a Beautiful Day Quilts trunk show. These fabrics are still in quilt shops. Most of them can still be found pretty easily, so I wanted to share this with you before they become much harder to find. So let's take a peek. First up is the Simply Beautiful Quilt. This is the kit quilt for Beautiful Day, and it uses both the red panel and the white panel that I designed for this fabric line in the centers of some of these blocks. That means that you can have the look of applique without having to applique, and I love that about this quilt. We're gonna take this down. I wanna show you the quilting up close, and I wanna show you these blocks. This is one of those quilts that looks a little bit harder to piece than it actually is. It's quite simple to piece this, and I love when a quilt does that, when it looks a lot trickier than it is. We'll take this down, look at the quilting, look at those blocks, and then you let me know what you think. And here is the quilt up close. I also grabbed some of the red panel fabric so you could see how it is. It is sold off of the bolt as running yardage. So you just buy it by the yard, and then you cut apart your squares for the blocks used in this quilt. I do have a video where I share how I cut these squares apart. If that's something that you haven't done before, working with a panel like this, you might find that video helpful. I'll have that linked in the description box. And then let's look at the quilting here. But you can see this is one of those panel squares, and then here is another one of those panel squares. The quilting is crosshatch, and Kayleen Perry did the quilting on this one for me. I always say my quilting designs as well as my quilter information in the description box too, so you have that information available to you. And then if you just look at this alternate block right here, is where this one is. It is just a courthouse steps or log cabin type block, and those are pretty simple to piece. So it's just this block alternating with the panels to create this really neat design. And I love that it looks so traditional. I love that you get that added feel of applique without having to actually take the time to applique. I love applique, but sometimes I don't always have the time to do applique. So this is a really nice alternative. The backing on this one is the white rose print. The binding is the red ticker tape sort of design. All of the fabrics are from Beautiful Day. And as I said, this is a kit quilt, and before filming this video, I checked to make sure that the kit was still easily able to be purchased, and as of right now it is. But once fabrics go out of stock in quilt shops, they do become much harder to find. But this, you can still purchase the whole kit if you wanted to. We're gonna move right back here to the quilt behind me. This is another way that you can use the panel within a quilt. This is a free pattern that I have on my blog called Calico Check. So I will link to this below so that you can grab this free pattern if you want. And it's just a really simple way to use the red panel, and then you just need two other fabrics in addition to that red panel. We'll take this down and look at that quilting also. Here is Calico Check up close. The quilting design on this is called Karen's Camellia, and it was quilted by David Hurd. I used that same red stripe for the binding here, and then this large scale red print for the backing. And that is what this quilt looks like. Moving on to the one behind me, another fun thing that you can do with the panel in this line is just to make a whole cloth quilt. This is 2 yards of the red panel fabric, and then I had my quilter, Rebecca Silbaugh, custom quilt this quilt so that it looked like an appliqued quilt, but it's not. It's just 2 yards of fabric. This will make a quilt about 60 by 72 inches, and I think it's just beautiful. It's a really easy way to make a quilt, and you certainly would not have to have it custom quilted. An all-over quilting design would be beautiful on this quilt as well. Let's take a look at Rebecca's beautiful quilting up close. She does such a beautiful job on my quilts. See what I mean? Isn't that just lovely? I always enjoy seeing what Rebecca does when I send her quilts. I don't ever tell her what I want her to do. I just say, work your magic. Whatever you do is going to be wonderful. And then she sends me back something like this. And it's just wonderful. So she echoed out kind of around the shapes of the panel motif here, and then little swirlies and some orange peel, and framed out some different spots, and I think it turned out so perfect. You can tell I really love the way this one turned out. On the back, it's that large scale red print, red floral, and then a stripe for the binding. And if you look behind me, you can see what the white panel looks like done exactly the same way. 2 yards of the white panel fabric, custom quilted, also by Rebecca. And it just makes it look like an applique quilt. And of course, I want you to see the quilting on this one up close as well. She quilted this one in the same manner, not the same quilting design, but to specifically create the look that this is an applique quilt rather than a whole cloth quilt. So you'll see a lot of detail echoing out all of the different shapes. This beautiful, I don't know, scroll or braided border here. And she just does amazing work. I will have her linked in the description box. She does get pretty busy, as you can well imagine, but if you get a chance to have her quilt for you, she does beautiful work. The backing on this one is the little rosebud print. I love this print. It was one of those fabrics that I really liked as I was designing the fabric, but then even more so once I started using it in quilts. And it found its way into a lot of my projects because I just think it's the cutest little print. And no binding on this one. Don't you worry, it will get bound, but if you're not new here, you know that we see quilts that aren't bound all the time, and I don't think I'm alone in being a quilter with unbound quilts. But if you are someone who always gets your quilts bound as soon as you finish them, way to go, because that is impressive. That gives you an idea of this quilt. And we're just gonna move on to the one behind me. Now, many of you have seen this quilt before. This was my quilt along last summer, the Beautiful Day Mystery Quilt, and many of you participated in that. But I know that there are a lot of you that are new to my channel who might not be familiar with this quilt, so I did want to share it. This also uses the white panel inside of the different block designs. This is a big quilt. It's about a queen-sized quilt, so it is a big one. And I'm not gonna pull this one down and talk about it in great detail, but I will link to the playlist where I shared all of the block tutorials and finishing and all of the good things about this quilt. So if you do want to see more information about it, you will have it handy to look at. Now we are going to move on to some of the quilts that don't use the panel, because there are a lot of those as well, and those were so much fun to design and to make. So let me get another quilt hung up for you. This next quilt is called Blossomville. It is a fat eighth friendly quilt, and it finishes at 72 by 84. And it's just a scrappy, happy floral garden of fun. I used that red rosebud print for those borders, and I think that just frames the quilt out so nicely. This one was also quilted by Kayleen Perry. She used the cartwheels quilting design to quilt this. It's just sort of this loopy little flower design, which I thought really complemented the pattern design very nicely. For my backing, that large scale red floral again. I used this print quite a bit for my backings because it is available in 108-inch wide. I don't know how easy the 108 is going to still be to get. It's also available in a 42-inch wide, but when I have a 108-inch wide fabric in my collections, I tend to use them a lot for the backings because they're so handy. And then for the stripe, I use the multicolored stripe from the Beautiful Day collection. And that is Blossomville. Behind me, I have Star Twist. This is a fat quarter quilt, and it is such a pretty one. I used the sketchy flower print from Beautiful Day for the sashing, and I love the way that looks. I'll show you that up close, but I will tell you now, that is one of the fabrics that's harder to find in this collection. I did design a similar fabric in my Buttercup and Slate collection that I will link below because it is easier to find and it has that same sort of sketchy flower feel to it. So if that's something that you would want to use, and you like the way that looks, it's nice to know that there is an alternate option that would work just as beautifully as this one here. Let's take this quilt down and take a look at that quilting. Kayleen Perry used the All Over Texture 2 quilting design to quilt Star Twist. I did go ahead and pull down the Buttercup and Slate fabric that I was talking about. So here you can see the print from Beautiful Day. It's similar to the Buttercup and Slate fabric. So if you wanted to have the look of the Beautiful Day, but you were no longer able to get that fabric, this is a wonderful substitute. It'll give it a similar sort of look. And then I want to show you the backing fabric is the red with the roses. You can see that quilting design is sort of a little double loop-de-loop sort of design. I think it's really cute. And the binding is the red stripe, and this quilt finishes at 63 by 78. We're just gonna move right back to the quilt behind me. This is Rosebud Waltz. This is a layer cake quilt. I always like a quilt that allows you to kind of show off some of those prints that you want to show off in a quilt, and this one does just that. Just a happy sort of quilt with sort of a rosebud motif there in the corners of each block. And Kayleen quilted this one for me as well. She used the quilting design called Cupid to quilt this Rosebud Waltz quilt, and it is sort of little loop-de-loops and almost a little heart shape. Right here you can kind of see, which I thought complemented this quilt really nicely. The background fabric that I use when I use a solid white is Bella Solid in the color 200. The color name is Off-White. And then for the backing, that adorable little rosebud print again, and the multi-stripe. To finish that off, the border is this red Sprigs fabric. There is also a white on white in Beautiful Day using this same motif, and I liked it so much that I brought it back in coriander seeds. So you're going to be able to purchase that white on white ongoing, which is wonderful to have that option. All right, moving behind me, this is Picket Fence Cottages. Let me grab the pattern here. This is a big quilt. It finishes at 74 by 95, and it is a fat 1/8 quilt. But when you see the pattern cover, you don't realize how big these cottages actually are. They're connected with the cutest little picket fence sashing, and the quilting Kayleen used on this just brings this quilt to a whole new level of adorable, in my opinion. Let's take a look at that. She used an upside down clamshell across this quilt, which makes it look like we have a little scalloped roofline, which I think is just adorable. And then you can see the little fences here. The border is that large scale pink floral. We have the red striped binding, and then for the backing, the roses on the pink. And this is such a sweet quilt. You could always downsize this. It is a pretty big quilt, as I said, but you could downsize it by making maybe just 4 blocks, and that would make a really cute little more baby-sized quilt or toddler quilt, which would be super cute. All right, let's just keep moving right along. I have 2 more quilts to share with you, and they're both made using the same pattern, but they are made with different background colors, so they look a little bit different. Now, I have shared this quilt on my channel before. This is Beautifully Charming, and it is a free quilt pattern with this collection. So I'll have that linked in the description box, along with all of the paid patterns. I'll have that information linked below as well. But this is Beautifully Charming. It is a charm pack friendly quilt. So each of those block centers is made using a charm pack. This is the gray version of this quilt. We'll look at this because the quilting is super pretty. And then I'll show you the red version of this quilt. The name of this quilting design is called Paper Blooms, and it is a little orange peel design, but with the peel part kind of flipped to circles and then X's, circles and X's. And this is a quilting design I've used a number of times because I just think it's so pretty. Just a fun little orange peel design. The backing here is the rose print on the gray and then the gray stripe for the binding. And let's just look behind me because you can see the red one next. And I always want to hear which you like better, the gray version or the red version. Usually it's pretty evenly split, but I'm curious to hear what you all think. Same quilt pattern, just done with red in place of the gray. And then of course we changed out that border to go with the red print a little bit better. The quilting on this is called Macintosh Rose, and it's a really neat one. And I'll show you that up close too. And here is the red version of this quilt. This quilting, as I said, is Macintosh Rose, just a super swirly rose flower with little leaves spread throughout. I love the way that sort of mimics the design of my fabrics with the rose here in the border. And the white background here is actually the white on white from the line. I don't know how well that shows up on camera, but it's just a nice little sparkle in the background if you can see that. The backing fabric on this is that large scale red print, the multi-stripe to finish it off with the binding. And that is the last quilt of this trunk show. Phew, that was a long one. We had a lot of fun things to share. So I covered a lot of information and showed you a lot of different things. All of the information I shared in regard to patterns, whether it's on my blog or in my Etsy shop, will be linked down below in the description box. I mentioned the Beautiful Day Mystery Quilt Along. I will have the whole playlist for the videos that I shared last summer for that quilt along. So if you want to make that quilt, there are video tutorials every step of the way for that one. I'll have that linked below. And if you have any questions about any of the quilts, feel free to ask in the comments. And I do thank you for watching, and I'll catch you again next time.